By a show of hands, who's pulled an all-nighter before an exam? Right, so quite a few of us. And you see, typically we'd expect to feel those effects, right? Our concentration may not be as best as it normally is. We may feel a bit groggy the next day. But what if I told you that all those late nights have greater implications than we can even think about? When I say the word aging, what comes to mind? I feel like most people think of wrinkles, fine lines, grey hairs. We may think of arthritis, when the cartilage between our bones wears down over time, swells and we develop pain. Emphasis on the passage of time. We may think of back pain, a common illness of the elderly, sometimes called osteoarthritis, when the cartilage between our spinal cord wears down over time and we develop pain. Emphasis on the passage of time. We may think of just pains in our legs, our arms, our neck, sometimes called peripheral artery disease, when again, over time, less and less blood is flowing towards these limbs. Notice how all the things I said to do with the passage of time have to do with physical characteristics we may not be thinking about right now. And so that brings me to my question. Have we been thinking about aging all wrong? You see, typically we think about aging as something that impacts us in 50, 60 years' time. However, aging impacts us right now, in the present, all of us in this room. So before we get started, let's just think about what aging actually is. It's a concept that's thrown around a lot, but what actually happens towards ourselves. I want you all to think of a photocopy, okay? Unless I told you to make a copy of an image. And then I told you to make a copy of that copy, and a copy of that copy. And I told you to keep on going until you've made 1 million copies. That last copy will look nothing like the original. In fact, you may not be able to tell what the original even was. The lines may not add up, it'll be unclear. And something very similar happens within ourselves, within our bodies. Over time, unfortunately, our cells are victims of damaging forces. Things like UV light, pollution, things we can't control. And so over time, that damage accumulates, builds up within our genetic code. And so when our chromosomes divide during cell division, those damages are replicated again and again and again. Until over time, that damage starts to result in physical characteristics, things that we start to see as aging. We develop fine lines, we develop wrinkles, we develop grey hairs. Additionally, we have things called telomeres. Now, telomeres are on the end of things called chromosomes. And over time, as our cells divide, unfortunately, those telomeres get shorter and shorter. And again, over time, we start to develop physical characteristics of aging. We start to develop fine lines, wrinkles, grey hairs. But this doesn't just impact our cells, no. In fact, one of the most fascinating areas that impacts is our brain. Who here has walked into a room and completely forgotten why you walked there in the first place? Right, I know I have. And so, this is just one example of how aging affects our body. I want you to picture your brain almost like a map, maybe like Google Maps, Apple Maps, whatever you prefer to use. And you see the pathways that we visit more often, the pathways that we see more frequently, they become more well-maintained, easier to access, more accessible. But the pathways we don't use as often, the skills we may not use every day or we learn when we were little, those become harder to access, less well-maintained, more rural. You see, our brain works in the exactly same way. We operate underneath something called neuroplasticity, and that's basically the brain's ability to adapt, to change itself. And so, as we get older, which is inevitable, it's going to happen to each and every one of us, our brain loses muscle mass. It loses things called myelinated fiber tissues. And what happens is we lose neural connections, we lose these pathways, they become harder to access. And so we start to forget stuff. Now let's go back to all those late nights apparently we've all had before, right? Sleeping is one of the most important processes that our body does every single night. And that's why it's so important. I want you to picture sleeping like your body's nighttime cleaning crew. But what happens when that cleaning crew doesn't arrive? You see, when we sleep, we have a decrease in a hormone called cortisol. Now, cortisol is a common stress hormone, right? Unfortunately, we all experience this basically every day, with exams, running late to meetings, things like that. But when we sleep, the amount of that hormone decreases, and instead another hormone could work, a growth hormone, called somatotropin. And what that does is that it influences muscle mass, developing muscle mass. It fixes and repairs broken tissues and cells. And it helps our bodies to grow and develop as we get older and older. But when we don't sleep, this can't occur. This nighttime cleaning so we lose muscle mass. We start to forget things more often. We start to feel more groggy. We start to make our concentration not being like 10 out of 10 every single day. And so sleep is one of the most important factors that impact aging, and it's something that we can influence now. Now, if you've been on Netflix recently, you've probably seen this guy. This is Brian Johnson, and he's a tech millionaire. And his main goal in life is to reduce the rate at which he's aging. And honestly, he spends so much money towards this goal. He spends over $2 million each year. And he does so many complex procedures and things like that. Now, some people may think he's an extremist, others may think he's a visionary. Personally, I find him very fascinating. However, I argue he's asking the wrong question. You see, Brian Johnson's whole thing is about trying to beat mortality, trying to live forever, trying to develop an endless life. But this isn't what we should be thinking about right now. You see, Brian Johnson is wasting his money. I believe that he should be thinking about the quality of life over the longevity of it, because that is the most important thing. And you see, this is something that is not new. It's not something we just learned about in the present day, no. We have grappled with this theory for 1,000 years. The Greeks introduced us to this character called Tithonus. And Tithonus was given the gift of immortality by the goddess Eos. And you'd think that'd be an amazing thing, right? He gets to live forever. However, he isn't given eternal life. He isn't given eternal youth. And so each year, his bones get weaker, he becomes more fragile, becomes more elderly, but he never dies. And so that introduces us to a new question. Is living longer the same thing as living better? Well, I'd argue that no, it's not the same thing as living better. And I feel like in today's day and age, we all focus on the wrong thing. We are trying to beat mortality, we are trying to live forever, but that is not the problem, no. We should be trying to think about how we can improve the quality of our lives, not the duration of it. And so what can we do? What can we do right now? Well, you can eat better, eating healthier foods. You can go outside, see your friends, do more face-to-face interactions, spending less time on social media. I know you're going to hate to hear it, but it has to happen. You see, if we do all these things, we can influence the way our body ages. And it's a problem that we should be thinking about right now. Not in 20 years' time, not in 30 years' time, not in 40 years' time. No, right now. And so, that brings us back to Brian Johnson. He's spending his time, he's spending his money trying to live forever. But, like I said, he's fighting the wrong problems. You see, we should be thinking about how we can beat mortality. We should be thinking about how we can live an endless life. We shouldn't be thinking about how long we're going to live for. Because aging is inevitable. It's going to happen to each and every one of us. It's something that we can't control. However, what we can control is how we age, the quality of our lives, the social interactions we have, the legacy we leave behind. And so that's why I say to you, the choices that you make today will help build your future self. So what are you going to do to create your future?